Hello, friends. So good to be with you today. We are in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. You know, I know that there's a real tendency in all of us to kind of cherry pick scriptures throughout the Bible as to I like this one, I don't like that one. We'll pick them out that has to deal with healing, deliverance, freedom from fear, whatever the case is. But we seldom ever really take the practical end of looking at the entire chapter in context. And that's, of course, what we're doing, kind of taking it verse by verse as best we can. I'm trying to blow over one chapter each time, so obviously there's a lot of things that are missed that I cannot get to, but at least I can kind of give you an overview so you can kind of maybe stimulate your own study. But I want to encourage you not to just bypass. There's so many scriptures that are in the Bible, especially like here in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10. He's talking about things that most of the time we don't give much attention to, but that's very important for our lives. He's talking about here the fact that we have been set free. We live not by the law, but we live by liberty. But there are certain responsibilities that go along with liberty, and the reason why is because there's the instructions about the possibilities of our failure in the midst of those liberties. There are times things that we can get involved in that may not be. It's kind of the gray area. You know what I'm talking about? The Bible doesn't speak specifically about that thing. It doesn't say thou shalt not go to a movie, but to some people, there are people that have their conscience really bothers them about going to a movie. And so as a result, they can't go. Whereas another one says, well, that doesn't bother me at all. And there's no real scripture in regard to that. So it's kind of a gray area. We've all run into those things, those gray areas. And, for us, it certainly is, can I smoke a cigar? Can I go to movies? Can I this? It's always attached to, can I do this? Which is really should be kind of a red flag that anytime you're making those kind of statements, it almost feels like, and it's not in every case, I don't want to just get a cookie cutter and say everything is after this, but too often there's times when we're saying that because we're trying to stay as close to the edge as we can, and that usually should be a red flag. Well, can I do this? Well, can I do that? Your conscience will tell you, and I just encourage you, you're better to give your whole heart to what you feel is right, rather than trying to dance around saying, well, I wonder if this is wrong. I wonder if this is acceptable or not. That's things that we do. For those people, of course, they didn't have movies in those days. They didn't have the things that we have. To them, one of the biggest problems that they were facing is they said, can I eat meat that is sold in the common place that has been offered to idols? Because what they would do is they would take the animal and they would kill that animal. It was the very best of meat because that was what they were going to offer to idols. And we're going to get a little more into that, exactly what that means, but it really caused problems. And to some people, they were saying, no, absolutely not. And to others, they're thinking, well, why? It's not a big deal. And usually because they had full knowledge, they understand there's only one God. That other God, that's just like a stick. That is nothing whatsoever. But Paul said, even though you have knowledge and you have liberty, you also have responsibility. Now, there's several questions that you need to ask in regard to that. Number one is what I'm going to do. Does it glorify God? Number two, does it edify those around me? Number three, does it amplify truth in my own life? And number four, is it a tool that abuses my liberty? Because that's exactly what happens. And the example here is Israel's liberty from bondage and slavery. In other words, they came out of Egypt, they came out of slavery, and now they were in liberty. They were free from that. No longer did that slavery have any dominion over them. They were liberated. They were free from the bondage of slavery. But in their behavior, they abused their liberty once they were in the wilderness. Once they were in this freedom, they took their liberty and began to abuse it. And they did that through idolatry. They did that through craving other things. They did that through not being happy with God's provision. They did that through complaining. And so in their liberty, they became abusive. And it displeased the Lord. So we've been given spiritual liberties, but we can also abuse those liberties. And that's basically what Paul is saying here. Now, I want you to remember, in chapter 9, he finished talking about, he gave the illustration in verse 27 of being in a race. And he said, listen, he said, we're all in a race. And he said, I strike a blow to my body and I make it my slave so that after I preach to others that I myself not be disqualified from the prize. You know, I don't want to be, once I've been set free from bondage and now I'm in liberty, I don't want to still, in the midst of my liberty, be disqualified, which can certainly happen. So, here in chapter 10, his next example is going to be the condition of the children of Israel when they face the temptation of the wilderness. Now, they're in liberty. I want you to keep in mind, they're not in bondage anymore. They're not slaves anymore. They've been set free from the slavery of sin, so to speak, if I can say it like that. Now, they've come out of that, and that thing that they were bound to, that slavery, that nature of sin, if we could bring it to us today, no longer has dominion over them, but they're facing temptation in the midst of their freedom. So, here's what we want to do is I want to start here with chapter 10, verse 1. And we're just going to read through these things a little bit and we'll kind of talk about it as we go. He said, verse 1, he said, for I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud, that Shekinah cloud, and that they all passed through the sea, the Red Sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. In other words, that was a point where they were baptized, and what they were before was buried in that baptism. What they were before, all of their slavery, all of their bondage, no longer did that identify with them. See, we have to understand that baptism is much more than just you go down dry and you come up wet. Baptism is much more than, well, I did it because Jesus said do it. Literally, what's happening when you are baptized, it says you are buried with him in baptism. The old man is buried, and what that means is that everything that was attached to you, all of the identity of what you used to be, of what you used to have, I believe even the things that may have been generational curses or whatever the case is, habits or whatever, I believe when we are baptized, all of that is buried. That is dead. That's a dead man. I am not taking that with me. In the same sense, these people passed through the Red Sea and they were baptized into Moses, and Moses representing the deliverance that was coming out of Egypt, brought them out. They were baptized into this ministry. They were baptized into, you understand what I'm saying. And it said in verse 3, it said they all ate the same spiritual food. They drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that is accompanying them, and that rock was Christ. There are so many things. You've got to understand that everything, the Bible's the menu, but Jesus is the meal. Everything in the Bible points to Jesus Christ. Everything. It's all, and the reason is because that was the plan of God. From the very foundation of the world, God created everything pointed to Christ and of us being one in him. And so they had this experience though. And they were actually, they drank from that rock of freedom, the water of life that springs up. Jesus said, out of your belly will flow rivers of living water. Well, they drank from something just like we drink from something. But verse 5 said, nevertheless, whoa, wait a minute. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them, and their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Wow. You mean to tell me that people can come out of bondage, out of slavery, and their behaviors in the midst of their liberties and freedoms can be displeasing to God, that they would lose their life? He said, now these things, verse 6, said these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. So even though you can be born in life, yet you in your liberty can set your heart on evil things just like they did and suffer the same consequences that they did when they came out of Egypt. They came out of bondage, but yet because they set their heart on evil things, literally, they lost the farm. They lost everything. And then he said, verse 7, he said, don't be idolaters as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and they drank and they got up and indulged in rivalry. He said we should not commit sexual immorality as some of them did. And in one day, 23,000 of them died. That's just a little hard for me to wrap my brain around. He said, verse 8, he said we should not test Christ as some of them did and were killed of snakes. Verse 10, and do not grumble as some of them did and were killed by destroying angel. Dang. Wait a minute. All of these people, they were free from bondage. They weren't under the yoke of slavery anymore. But in their freedom, they got into gray areas and drew them into the place that they tempted Christ, that they grieved the heart of God. They grumbled, they tested Christ, they complained about the food, they complained about the water. In the midst of their freedom, they lost it all. And he said in verse 11, he said, these things happened to them as examples. Okay, everything that we see in that Old Testament, that was an example. It said these things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the age has come. The culmination of the age has come to us. And all of those things were written for us to look at. The idea is that the Old Testament is relevant to New Testament believers, and it's anticipating the new thing. Everything in the Old Testament is anticipating the new. Everything that you saw in the Old Testament was a picture, it was a type. It was anticipating what was new. One of the sayings, I forget who even said it, it said the new is in the old contained. Talking about the New Testament is contained in the Old Testament, and the old is the new explained. So what we're doing is explaining now what happened in the Old Testament. They were in types and shadows looking forward to the New Testament. So it's relevant to us. The things that happened to those people in that time, it was relevant to us. It made a difference. Now, verse 12 says, now, if you think you're standing firm, you think you're standing firm, you need to be careful that you don't fall. This is kind of a timeless statement. It really is. There's a tendency. You're not going to find more of a grace preacher than me. Somebody said, I don't like grace. Well, I don't care. I don't have a Messiah complex. The grace of God is the thing that brought me out where it is, and the grace of God is what has kept you, whether you know it or not. And most of the time, the only reason people complain about grace is because they're judgmental of other people. They want to cast the beam out of other people's eye, or the mote that is in other people's eyes, and they have a beam in their own eye. That's usually why people do that. But the fact is, the grace of God does bring us out and gives us liberty. But it is possible through your behavior, through your thoughts, through your attitude, to abuse that gift of grace that has been given to us to the point that we grieve the Holy Spirit and lose that, and lose the wonderful things that God has had, because we are partners with it. We have a responsibility. God gives us freedom, but we have a responsibility within that freedom. And that's called stewardship. We're going to stand in judgment for everything that is done in this body. Now, I'm not bound to the Old Testament from the standpoint of the law as such. I'm not under the law. I'm not. It has zero to do with me. I'm in Christ. That's the law of Christ. I'm bound to the law of love. I'm bound to the law of Christ. I've been liberated. I've been brought out of bondage into freedom. But don't think that you're not going to stand in judgment for the things you do in the midst of that freedom. And so he said, look, dude, you think you're all that in a bag of chips? He said, you need to be careful. You need to be watchful of your behavior, your attitudes, your thoughts, things you say, because you may be in a situation where you could fall. So he said, and then he said, listen, verse 13. He said, there's no temptation taken you, but such is common to man. No temptation has overtaken you except what's common to mankind. In other words, there's nothing going to come on you that didn't come to your father and to his father and to his father. You understand? There's nothing new. Same thing. Same song, second verse. The things you're screwing up over, your dad screwed up over. I mean, that's just, it's a generation. Sometimes we are dumber than a sack of hammers. We fall over the simplest things, even when we know. So he's guaranteeing us here. He said there's no temptation that's going to come to you and overtake you that is different than every other man has ever gone through. But he said, God is faithful. He said, I know you're going to go through these things. I know in your liberty, you're going to be pulled to this side and that side. But he said, I promise you, God is faithful. He is. And he will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. There's not going to be something come to you that you can't bear. Well, what that means is deal with your responsibilities within that temptation beyond what you can bear. And he said, when you're tempted, he'll also provide a way out, a way of escape, so you can endure it. God. Oh, I love that, don't you? Temptation comes to all of us, but God always makes a way of escape. And you know, I don't want to say it any more than you want to say it, but you have to take that way of escape. You just have to. You might have to turn the channel. You might have to not go to that website anymore. You know, we tend to flee temptation, but we leave our forwarding address. God, I'm telling. Yeah, I know. Been there, done that, bought the T-shirt, all of that kind of stuff. I know. But that's the problem, and that's what Paul was really trying to share with these people. And so he's going to kind of now bring this home. Now that he said all of that, he's going to begin to bring this home. He's going to talk about these idol feasts, and he's going to bring in the Lord's Supper. And it's going to sound like he's contradicting. Please bear with me here. He's going to sound like he's contradicting a little bit. But what he's talking about is your behavior in the midst of your freedom. Even though we know that an idol is nothing but a stick, there's only one God. Only one God, just one. And we know that an idol is nothing, yet in our freedom, we've got to flee idolatry. We've got to avoid embarking on things that might pull us in to where it would damage us or would damage those around us. And so even in your liberty, you abstain from this or from that. Don't do anything that's going to cause confusion. The weaker brother might be someone who is a new believer, someone who they're not skilled in knowledge. They're still kind of babes. They're carnal. And when they see you involved in something that challenges their conscience, you know, it could do one of two things. And it can either bring such disappointment to them, or it may make them say, well, it's all right for him, it's all right for me. You know, that's like drinking alcohol. I do not drink alcohol. I don't. I think it's unnecessary. Guys, listen to me. You say, oh, I need a drink. No, you don't. Come on. It's not necessary. It's not. But let's say I had liberty that I could go and I could have a glass of wine, or I could do whatever. and I'm out someplace and someone sees me doing that, what if he's been an alcoholic? And he says, well, if Edmund can do it, I can do it. I mean, I think it's all right. Well, my liberty may have caused a stumbling block to someone else that causes them to totally collapse. That's my responsibility. My liberty brings responsibility. So he says here, verse 14, therefore, my friends, my beloved, and he's talking to these people in Corinth, and these are people who just, I mean, he's had a hard time with them, and whoa, what a mess. He tells them, say, flee idolatry. And he said, I'm speaking to sensible people. I'm speaking to those that are mature. I'm speaking to those who have grown up in the Word of God. He just said, judge for yourself what I'm saying. And now what he's going to do, he's going to give an example. He's actually going to give two examples. The first one is going to be when people get together for communion. Okay? When people get together for the communion, here's what he says in verse 16. He says, is not the cup of thanksgiving or a blessing for which we give thanks a participation or a communion in the blood of Christ? And is not the bread that we break a participation in the body of Christ? Here he's talking about the Lord's Supper. I'm going to take communion. He said, when I take of communion, I take of the cup, I take of the bread. He said, I'm partaking in something. I'm being a part of something. In communion, we have actually two dimensions. We have a horizontal communion with God, and we have a vertical communion with one another. I think that's very important. And because in this sense, when I take communion, I take it into my body, it becomes part of me. It's no longer a cup out there or a piece of bread out there. It is absorbed into my body. The nutrients in it, everything, it just, my system breaks it down and it becomes a part of me. It becomes energy to me. It becomes whatever to me. So obviously you understand that. But in that sense, I become one with God. I'm partaking of the broken body. I'm partaking of the shed blood. But when you take that with me, we are in a sense becoming one with each other because it's the same body now that you have, that I have. We've taken that and now we are partakers of the same body, which makes us, in a sense, it makes us one with each other. And because that's a source, we become one with each other. He said, because there is, verse 17, there's one loaf, and we, who are many, are one body, for we all share the same loaf. That's what he just said. He said, because we're eating the same loaf, we're the same body. We're partakers of him and partakers of each other. We become one. Okay? Now, that's his first example. Second example is this. People going to the temple to offer sacrifices. He said, consider the people of Israel. Do not those who eat the sacrifices participate in the altar? Now, here's what would happen. When someone would go to the temple to offer a sacrifice, they would bring it before the priest. A portion was given to the priest. A portion was given to you to take home. And a portion was sacrificed before God. So that's what he's saying. He said, consider the people of Israel. Do not those who eat the sacrifices participate in the altar? So he said, yeah, we're participating. I'm becoming one with you. You're becoming one with me. I'm becoming one with him. He's becoming one with me. So what am I saying here? Verse 19, do I mean that the food sacrificed to an idol is anything, or that the idol is anything? And he's asking a question. Verse 20, no, it's not. But, listen to this, the sacrifices of pagans are offered to demons. Wow. I want to get into that in just a moment. I really want to stop and pause there concerning the demonic influence that's behind all of these things. But he says the sacrifice of pagans are offered to demons and not to God. And he said, I don't want you to be participant or fellowship with demons. I don't want that. Okay. When we take communion, we're showing solidarity with God and with each other. Sacrifices at the temple show solidarity with each other, with God, and that sacrifice. So, if you go to a pagan temple, a ceremony, and you indulge in the meat there, if you go, somebody says, I'm just going to hang out, I'm just going to be a witness to somebody. I just feel like me being there. I know I don't have any business being in that place, but I'm just going anyway. I know it's a wicked, absolute, treacherous place, but I'm just going to go hang out. Who knows? They might come to Christ if they see me. So he said, if you go to a pagan temple, basically, or ceremony, and you indulge in that meal there, what you're doing is you're showing solidarity with that pagan deity and the people that are there. Now you might say, well, wait a minute. Chapter 8, you said that an idol is nothing. And that's true. It is nothing. You have to keep that in mind. But you have to balance that with knowledge. It's not just a made-up God, but it's actually demons. That's what Paul was saying. I want you to hear me this. I want to say one thing here. Behind that worship system in Corinth was a demon entity that was at work. And by going to their festivals, partaking with them, you're showing solidarity with that system. And I want to go a little further than that. Every world religion, because you're going to find world religions everywhere. Every world religion created by man is demonically inspired. Every one of them. Don't you ever think that it's not. That's what it's a false worship behind that is this demonic entity. Somebody said, why would he do that? Well, there's several reasons. One is distraction. Finds people who are in desperate search for God and provides them some counterfeit experience. And many times it even becomes demonic worship and they don't even realize what they're doing. So we all have knowledge as well. We're mature in this. We understand that. We understand that an idol is nothing, even though there is demonic worship there. Verse 21, he said this. He said, you cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You can't have a part in both the Lord's table and the table of demons. Wow. He said, are we trying to arouse the Lord's jealousy? Are we stronger than he? I mean, and this is guys, listen to me. This is a serious problem, especially in these days. We can compromise in our liberties to the point that we partake in something that actually has the demonic influence behind it. You're not just taking of things intellectually. When you partake of something, when you eat of something, when you commune with something, you are undergirding that which is behind it. You're embracing, you're allowing that to be a part of your life. Now, verse 23 said this. He said, because here's what he's going to do is give you the summary. Please bear with me here. Again, I'm trying to blow past this because I don't want to hold you too long, but I want to at least get through this. Verse 23, he said, all things are lawful to me. I have the right to do anything. That's what Paul said. I have the right to do anything. All things are lawful to me. He said, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. Now here's the deal. Here's the balance. No one, verse 24, should seek their own good, but the good of others. Whatever you do, you understand that those things are there and they are a part of life. And I don't want to do anything that is not at least taking into my conscience the effect it's going to have on those around me. Though I have liberty to do something and it's no big deal to me, I think it's stupid, but yet I have to think of you. So that's why my movement might become less and less because of you. I might have liberties or things that don't bother me one snap, but I would be horrified at the thought that I might cause you to stumble. I can't think of anything worse than that. The effect of my life, the influence of my life, all of the things that I've studied, that I've worked with, that I've prayed about, bringing the culmination of my entire life as it is, and then hurt someone with that, that's failure, utter failure. And he said, even though you have a right to do things, it's not constructive. In verse 24, he said, no one should seek their own. No, you shouldn't seek your own. But you need to seek that which is good for the use of others. So, verse 25, he's going to address this situation. What about these things that are offered to idols? He said, eat anything sold in the meat market. Now, he didn't say going to the, I'm going to go hang out with what's her name, and we're going to eat this that is offered. I ain't going to do that. But he said, when you go to the meat market, he said, don't raise questions for your conscience sake. He said, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, everything in it. The earth, everything in it belongs to God. You know, this isn't a festival here. This is a marketplace. This is a meat market. And he says, when you go in, don't say, hey, is that offered to idols? You know, is Zeus, is he, you know, that's nothing. That's nothing. So he said, he said here, if an unbeliever invites you to go to a meal and you want to go, okay. I mean, there may be somebody who is an unbeliever. That's what he says right here, verse 27. An unbeliever, that's somebody who hasn't come to the knowledge of Christ yet. They don't know that. They're still living as a pagan. He said, if they invite you to go to a meal, you want to go? If that's what you want to do, go. That's fine. Eat whatever is put before you without raising questions of conscience. Don't start asking them, was this meat offered? If somebody puts something in front of you, eat it with thanksgiving. For all things, really, are sanctified through prayer and sanctified through prayer and giving thanks to God. So he said, if an unbeliever, verse 27, invites you to a meal and you want to go, eat whatever's put before you without raising questions. But if someone says to you, hey, this has been offered in sacrifice, he said, don't eat it. Don't eat it. Now somebody say, why? Well, he answers that. For the sake of the person who told you and for the sake of conscience. You know, which I'm wondering, why would somebody invite you to come to their house and say, oh yeah, here, I'm going to give this to you. This is invited to idols. This is dedicated. This is sacrificed to idols. That sounds like a trap to me, you know. And there are some people who might be without, and they're just kind of testing your faith. I wonder if you really mean it, because in those days, you got to understand, they felt that these people here were very much connected to Israel and Jewish religion, which was very kosher in the way that they ate and the way they carried themselves. So he said, you know, he said, if somebody says to you, this thing's been offered in sacrifice, he said, don't eat it. Just decline, graciously decline. He said, both for the sake of that person, because they need to understand where you fit in this. You don't have to beat them in the head with a 40-pound King James Bible. You don't have to say anything rude. Just decline. Just don't eat that for the sake of the person who told you and for the sake of conscience. And he said in verse 29, he says, I'm referring to the other person's conscience, not yours. In other words, you should be mature enough to know that idol is nothing. But he said that person's conscience is important because that's going to have an effect on how they respond to God, or even if they respond to God. For he said, verse 29, for why is my freedom being judged by another person's conscience? Verse 30, if I take part in the meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something that I thank God for? Verse 31, so whether you eat or drink, whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. No matter where I'm at, no matter what I eat, everything that I do with thanksgiving for the glory of God. That's for my conscience, certainly. But I'm very concerned in what I do in my liberty that's going to affect the conscience of other people that are watching me. You know, if somebody came up, and there's been times, and I mentioned alcohol that I don't drink, but I've had people, I'd go places, and they would offer me a drink. You know, they would say, can I get you something to drink? And I knew they were talking about alcohol. And I'd say, no, thanks. I'm good, thank you. That's really all that needs to be said. And they knew I didn't drink. They knew I didn't, but maybe it was just out of their sense of courtesy, maybe their sense of hospitality. They felt like they wanted to. Who knows? Maybe some of the other preachers that they knew uh, drank like a fish. But I just, no thank you. No thank you. Water would be fine. That's really all that needs to be said. So he says here in verse 30, he said, don't cause anyone to stumble. He said, I don't care whether it's Jews, Greeks, or the church of God. Don't cause people that are in this religion or that kind of unbeliever or that kind of pagan or people in the church. Don't cause them to stumble. He said in verse 33, for even as I try to please everyone in every way, he said, I'm not seeking my own good, but the good of the many, so that they might be saved. I want to say this in closing here. People are more important than your liberties. And if you are mature, if you are someone who has grown, you'll understand that. Now, if you're a child and if you're selfish, you'll basically have the response, well, I'll do what I want. I don't care what they think. That is an extreme spiritual immaturity. Spiritual maturity is summed up in love, walking in love. And therefore, love has a code of conduct in relation to other people. And if I truly care about them, my conduct it's very important to me that I don't do anything that's going to cause them to stumble because of love. That's the motivation for it all. And he said, I'm not seeking my own good, but I want the good of many so that they might be saved. They are important. That person is more important than my liberties. And it is for yours too. Now, actually, we could go down in verse 11, chapter 11, verse 1, and if I could just run ahead and capture that one verse and drag it back up here so we could finish with it. He said in verse 1 there of the next chapter, he said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. That really should go right there. But I hope this has brought maybe a little bit of clarity to you. This has been a chapter that in many ways that has caused a little concern because it seemed to conflict back and forth. But you just got to look at the whole context of the whole thing. Look at it in context, okay? All right, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you taking this time. This has been really a good study. I've enjoyed this very much. If you would not mind, please just leave me a note. I would certainly appreciate that. Also, share. You can share. That's very simple. Just there on your program there. You just push share, and it will send it to the people on your feed, the people that I won't have an opportunity to reach. Okay. You can go if you want more information. You can go to my website jerryedmond.com, and you can find a lot of resources there that'll be a blessing to you. I so much appreciate you guys. I really do. As in every podcast that I do, I want to relate to you my appreciation for your friendship. The relationship with you is a treasure to me that I value, and I mean that. Thank you. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for being my friend. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next chapter. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.